How can you still be single?" Sarah's voice cut through the warm Thanksgiving air like a blade through silk. Her manicured fingers gestured dismissively at me across the dining table, where our entire extended family sat frozen. The cranberry sauce gleamed like blood under the chandelier light. My hands trembled as I gripped my water glass, feeling 20 pairs of eyes burning into my skin. "I mean seriously, Emma, you're 32. Her laugh was sharp, theatrical. "Even Cousin Janet found someone, and she lives with 8 cats. The woman who had spent years apologizing for her own existence was about to die forever. Before we begin, if you enjoy true and exciting stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Write in the comments what city or country you are watching from. Now, let's get to the beginning of this story. Growing up, our house had always been Sarah's stage. The colonial mansion with its pristine white columns and perfectly manicured lawn was where she learned to perform. Every family gathering was her audition for favorite child. Mom would set the table with grandmother's china, the kind that caught light like promises, while Sarah practiced her latest achievements in the mirror above the fireplace. The house itself seemed to conspire with her performance. Crystal chandeliers cast flattering light across her blonde hair, while the mahogany dining table reflected her animated gestures like a spotlight. Even the way sound carried through the high-ceilinged rooms seemed designed to amplify her laughter and diminish my quieter observations. I was the supporting character in her narrative, the quiet sister who brought good grades and never caused trouble. While Sarah dated quarterbacks and homecoming kings, I buried myself in books and built websites for local businesses from my bedroom, the blue glow of my computer screen becoming my constant companion. The clicking of my keyboard was often drowned out by the sound of Sarah's friends gathering in the living room below, their voices mixing with whatever boy band was popular that month. Our parents' attention flowed to her like water finding its level, natural, effortless, complete. I would watch Dad's face light up when Sarah entered a room, the same way flowers turn toward sunlight. Mom's voice would gain an octave of excitement when discussing Sarah's plans, while conversations about my programming projects were met with polite nods and quick subject changes. "Emma's just focused on her career," Mom would say with that apologetic tone reserved for explaining away disappointments. The phrase became her standard deflection at church socials and neighborhood barbecues, delivered with a slight shrug that suggested my priorities were admirable but ultimately misguided. Dad would nod and change the subject, as if my single status was a temporary illness that politeness could cure. I learned to read the subtle choreography of family disappointment. The way Mom's smile would tighten when other mothers bragged about their daughters' engagement announcements. How Dad's eyes would glaze over when I explained a particularly successful project. The gentle redirection of conversation whenever my accomplishments threatened to overshadow Sarah's social calendar. But nothing in that house felt real. The smiles were practiced, the conversations rehearsed. Even the family photos were staged, Sarah in the center, golden and glowing, while I stood slightly behind, always slightly behind. The Persian rugs muffled more than footsteps. They silenced questions that might disturb the perfect facade. The very air seemed thick with unspoken expectations, heavy with the weight of appearances that mattered more than authenticity. I should have seen the cracks forming earlier. Sarah's comments had been growing sharper over the years, like a blade slowly being honed. What started as sisterly teasing evolved into surgical strikes designed to draw blood in public spaces. "Oh, Emma's too picky," she'd say at cousins' weddings, loud enough for tables to hear. "She thinks she deserves some Prince Charming." The way she emphasized "thinks" made it sound like delusion. At family barbecues, she'd introduce me to her friends' brothers with theatrical enthusiasm, then watch me fumble through conversations about interests we didn't share. The rejection was always my fault, too bookish, too serious, too intimidating. Never that perhaps I simply didn't want what she thought I should want. The scent of her signature perfume, something French and expensive, became a warning signal. When I smelled those notes of jasmine and bergamot, I knew performance time was approaching. She'd find ways to position herself as the success story, the one who figured life out, while casting me as the cautionary tale. Our mother enabled it with worried glances and helpful suggestions. Maybe you should try that dating app Sarah mentioned. Have you thought about softening your look a little? As if finding a man was merely a matter of correct packaging and strategic compromise. The Thanksgiving before that final dinner, Sarah had announced her engagement to Bradley, an investment banker whose personality was as bland as his khakis. The ring was enormous, catching light like a tiny disco ball, and she made sure every conversation circled back to wedding planning. I watched our family orbit around her announcement like planets around a sun. Great Aunt Helen, who hadn't smiled since the Carter administration, actually giggled when Sarah described the venue. Uncle Robert, who usually grunted through family dinners, asked detailed questions about the guest list. That night, I sat in my apartment, a converted loft downtown with exposed brick and plants that actually thrived, and felt something shift inside my chest, not jealousy exactly, more like clarity. I realized I'd been living my life as a response to their expectations rather than as an expression of my own desires. My phone buzzed with notifications from the freelance clients whose businesses I'd helped grow from kitchen table operations to six-figure successes. 3 different entrepreneurs wanted to discuss new projects. A tech startup in Portland needed someone to overhaul their entire digital presence. The work felt like breathing, natural, essential, life-giving. But somehow, none of this registered as real success in my family's economy of worth. The year leading up to that final Thanksgiving had been a strange dance of achievement and invisibility. My business, Digital Roots Consulting, had exploded beyond anything I'd imagined. Fortune 500 companies were calling. I'd been featured in 3 industry magazines. The bank account numbers looked like phone numbers. Yet at every family gathering, the focus remained on my relationship status. Sarah would update everyone on her wedding planning, while I sat quietly. My professional victories feeling somehow smaller in the warm glow of her domestic triumph. I'd started declining dinner invitations, claiming work obligations that weren't entirely lies. The distance felt necessary, protective. When I did attend, I'd catch Mom studying my face with that worried expression reserved for sick pets and stock market crashes. "You seem tired, sweetheart," she'd say, which was code for, "You seem increasingly unmarriageable." Sarah's criticism had evolved into a sophisticated art form. She'd learned to cloak her attacks in concern, weaponizing sisterly love. "I just worry about you ending up alone, Em. I mean, what happens when Mom and Dad are gone? Who's going to take care of you?" The assumption that I needed taking care of was particularly rich, considering I'd been financially independent since college, while she'd moved from Dad's credit card to Bradley's checking account without missing a beat. But I kept my mouth shut, kept playing the role of the sister who was trying her best, but falling short. It was easier than explaining that my version of success looked different from theirs. Easier than defending a life that felt complete and purposeful and exactly what I'd chosen. The morning of that Thanksgiving, I'd gotten an email that changed everything. Netflix wanted to acquire one of my clients' streaming platforms for $43 million. My commission would be more than Sarah's entire wedding budget. I stared at the number until it stopped looking like mathematics and started looking like freedom. I drove to my parents' house that day with something new settling in my bones. Not anger, exactly. More like resolve. I parked behind Sarah's white BMW, a graduation gift from our parents, and saw her through the window, gesturing animatedly while our cousins listened with rapt attention. The scent of turkey and stuffing mixed with that familiar perfume as I walked through the front door. Sarah air-kissed my cheek and immediately began updating me on wedding details I hadn't asked about, her voice carrying across the living room like a bell announcing important news. I nodded and smiled and played my part, but something felt different. The script felt optional now. The role felt like a costume I could remove whenever I chose. That's when she delivered the line that broke something open inside me. How can you still be single? The question hung in the air like smoke from a just-blown candle. The dining room fell silent except for the distant sound of football commentary from the den. Uncle Martin's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Cousin Lisa's eyes went wide with second-hand embarrassment. I looked around the table at faces I'd known my entire life. People who'd watched me grow up, who'd celebrated my college graduation, who'd heard fragments of my professional success, but somehow still reduced my worth to my marital status. The woman who had spent years shrinking herself to fit other people's expectations took her final breath. "You really want to know, Sarah?" My voice was steady, almost conversational. I set down my water glass with deliberate precision. The crystal chimed against the wooden table like a tiny bell marking time. I'm single because I chose to build something instead of just finding someone. The silence stretched like taffy. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, each second marking the collapse of years of carefully constructed family dynamics. Sarah's perfectly glossed lips parted slightly, her rehearsed response apparently not ready for this particular performance. The chandelier above us seemed to dim. Or maybe it was just that all the light in the room had shifted to focus on this moment. Aunt Carol's fork remained suspended halfway to her mouth, a piece of sweet potato balanced precariously on the tines. Uncle Jim's wineglass had stopped moving entirely, as if even the burgundy liquid understood the gravity of what was happening. The football game from the den seemed miles away now, the cheering crowd a distant echo of a world that suddenly felt very small. While you were collecting boyfriends like handbags, I was collecting businesses. While you were planning your Instagram perfect life, I was helping other women build empires. While you were measuring your worth by someone else's last name, I was making my own name mean something. I could hear my mother's sharp intake of breath, but I couldn't stop now. The truth felt like water breaking through a dam, powerful and unstoppable and long overdue. The words had been building pressure for years, and now they flowed with the force of everything I'd kept buried under polite smiles and family obligations. My clients don't ask me if I'm married, Sarah. They ask me if I can double their revenue. The companies bidding for my services don't care about my relationship status. They care about my track record. The women I mentor don't see a spinster. They see someone who proved that success doesn't require someone else's approval. Sarah's face had gone the color of the white tablecloth, but I wasn't finished. The room felt electric, charged with the energy of a storm that had been gathering for decades. So yes, I'm still single, and I'm also financially free, professionally respected, and personally fulfilled. I own my apartment outright. I travel when I want. I work with people who change industries. And yesterday I closed a deal that will net me more money than Bradley makes in 5 years. The engagement ring that had dominated every conversation suddenly looked smaller somehow, just another piece of jewelry on a finger that was now trembling slightly. I'm not single because I can't find someone, Sarah. I'm single because I refuse to settle for someone. In the silence that followed, I could hear everything. The soft whisper of the heating system, the distant sound of children playing in the neighbor's yard, the rustle of someone's dress as they shifted uncomfortably in their chair. It was as if the entire world had paused to absorb what had just happened. 2 months later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Seattle, reviewing contracts for a new client when my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Sarah's engagement had been called off. Apparently, Bradley had some concerns about her attitude and needed time to think. I stared at the message for a long moment, waiting to feel satisfaction or vindication. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Sadness for the sister who'd built her entire identity around someone else's validation. My phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer. Emma? Her voice was small, unfamiliar. Can we talk? I think I need help figuring some things out. 3 weeks later, Sarah was sitting in my living room, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, asking about my work with genuine curiosity for the first time in our adult lives. She'd started a small business selling handmade jewelry, something she'd always loved but never thought practical enough to pursue. The afternoon light streamed through my windows, casting warm geometric patterns across the hardwood floors. My apartment felt different with her in it, smaller somehow, but also more complete. The exposed brick walls that I'd chosen for their industrial honesty seemed to soften in her presence, and the plants that thrived in every corner created a jungle of possibility that neither of us had expected. "I don't know how to do any of this," she admitted, gesturing at the laptop where we'd been building her first website. Her fingers, usually adorned with perfectly manicured nails, were stained with the silver polish she'd been experimenting with on her latest designs. "I don't know how to be valuable without being somebody's something." There was something raw in her voice that I hadn't heard since we were children. It reminded me of the way she used to sound when she woke up from nightmares, small and uncertain, and looking for someone to tell her everything would be okay. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw someone I'd forgotten existed. The little girl who used to make elaborate necklaces from painted pasta and give them to everyone she loved. The teenager who'd spent hours sketching dress designs in notebooks she thought no one noticed. The young woman who'd once told me she wanted to study art but was afraid it wasn't practical enough for someone with her responsibilities. "Let's start with what makes you happy," I said, closing the laptop and turning to face her fully. "Not what looks good on social media, what actually makes you happy." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been performing for so long, I'm not sure I remember what happiness feels like when no one's watching." The confession hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure was safe to cross. But I reached across the space anyway, covering her stained fingers with mine. "Then let's figure it out together." Over the following months, I watched Sarah transform in ways that had nothing to do with men or marriage or anyone else's expectations. Her jewelry business grew slowly, organically, built on genuine passion rather than desperation for validation. She'd call me at odd hours to share small victories, a custom order from a customer in Oregon, a feature in a local lifestyle blog, the first month where her profits covered her rent. The change wasn't just professional. The sharp edges that had defined her personality for years began to soften. She started listening more than she performed. She asked questions about my work that went deeper than polite interest. She even helped me redesign my website, bringing an aesthetic sensibility I hadn't realized I was missing. That Christmas dinner was quieter than usual. Sarah wore one of her own necklaces instead of her engagement ring, a delicate piece of hammered silver that caught the light like captured starlight. The conversation focused on her business plans and my upcoming project in London. Mom still looked slightly confused by the shift in family dynamics, but Dad seemed relieved not to have to make small talk about wedding venues. There was something different about the house that night, too. The same crystal still reflected the chandelier light. The same Persian rug still muffled our footsteps, but the air felt lighter somehow, less performed, more lived in. We were different people at the same table, speaking a different language of success. One built on choices rather than chance, on purpose rather than perfect appearances. As we cleared the dishes together, something that would have been unthinkable in years past, Sarah paused with her hands full of our grandmother's china. "I never thanked you," she said quietly, "for saving me from a life I thought I wanted." I smiled, watching the last of the evening light fade through the kitchen window. "You saved yourself, Sarah. You just needed someone to believe you could." "And you? What do you think? Did she do the right thing? What would you have done in her place?" If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us what you thought in the comments. Your support is what helps us continue bringing you exciting stories like this one. Now watch other stories on screen. We'll see you next time, with love and respect.